Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Think about where you are in your career versus where you want to be in your career and the moves required to get there. It's the subject of a brand new book co-written by 3 business school professors, including our next guest, Ethan Bernstein. Ethan Bernstein is professor of business administration at Harvard Business School. He joins us from Boston. The brand new book is Job Moves, 9 Steps for Making Progress in Your Career. Ethan joins us from Boston this afternoon. Ethan, good to have you with us. How are you?
Thank you, Tim. I'm doing great. How are you?
We're doing well, thanks. Excited to talk to you about this because it's actually based on a Harvard Business School course and research that the 3 of you have conducted with over 1,000 professionals. Can you talk a little bit about how you made this book? I almost said how you built this book because it is something that you guys spent years building.
And it is based on new product development. But look, this was the genesis of the book. Let's start with some numbers. Every year, roughly 1 billion people change jobs on average. People do a job move roughly every 4 years these days. And what we know is that hundreds of millions report that they're disappointed with the outcome from their switch. You ask an audience the fastest they've ever gone from taking a new job to realizing it's not right for them, and usually as many as 3/4 say less than a year. And maybe they ended up in a new role they've quit quietly. Maybe they started a new job search just months after arriving in a new job. Whatever the case, I personally find that frustrating. People invest a lot in a job move, and so do their families and communities. The ROI should be better. And so in 2009, now 15 years ago, we decided to do some research on job switching to try to make it better. And our research over the past 15 years that's followed and supported over 1,000 job seekers shows that we actually can help. It starts with a simple reframe that we stole from the world of product design and the jobs to be done theory. Just like people hire products or services to make progress in their life, we find that people try to hire their next job as much as their employer hires them to make progress in their career. And that's the premise and the framing behind the book.
Can I just say, wait, I'm not sure if I'm following you, but I've often talked when I talked with younger individuals or folks in my family who are younger, and starting out their job career. And I'm kind of like, you need to interview too for the job that you want, as well as companies interviewing you. This is a process, but there's 2 sides to it, right? Like you really need to kind of figure out where you want to go, what you're looking for, and really kind of know what you might be stepping into. Is that fair?
Absolutely. There's a supply side and a demand side. And that's why we, Bob is a guru, a genius in new product innovation. He's invented more products than any human being I know. And so he brings to the table the work that he did with Clay Christensen, who is well known for his work on innovation, around jobs he'd done. This idea that when consumers buy a product, they hire that product for a struggling moment in their lives that the product helps them solve. There's a root cause that leads them to purchase, not just the attributes and features of the product, but how the experience they'll have with it. And we find truly that's how people do and should think about the next step in their career when they make progress through a move. And that progress is defined by a bunch of causes, we call them pushes and pull forces, that help them make that progress by hiring that next job, that next organization. Maybe it's even a role within their organization for the job to be done in their career.
Ethan Bernstein, professor of business administration. We're speaking with him right now. He's at Harvard Business School. Professor, you mentioned 2 other names, Michael Horn and Bob Moesta, who are the co-authors of the book. You co-wrote the book with those 2 other individuals. You also just mentioned Clayton Christensen, and I think anyone who's gone to business school certainly understands what a legend he is in the world of business, even of course outside of business school as well. He passed away just about almost 5 years ago at this point. Can you talk a little bit about his influence on the project and this whole idea of disruptive innovation?
So very personally, Clay was my dissertation advisor, or one of them. And he's the person who brought us together. And so in that sense, Clay was instrumental in creating the space for us to create this book. In fact, the reason I met Bob Moesta in 2009 and saw him interview a customer who'd bought a product to understand what the job done that customer had purchased that product to serve was because Clay, let's even say, voluntold me into the session in Aldrich Hall here at the Harvard Business School to see it. And that was the genesis for the idea of framing the book this way and doing the research that we did using those validated protocols that Clay and Bob created, but not on customers buying products, but rather employees choosing jobs. Michael Horn is a class of 2006 from here, an education and upskilling guru who co-authored a book with Clay He co-authored Disrupting Class and has since authored a number of books on education and upskilling. And so the three of us each bring something different to the table. I'm the HR talent people professor. Michael is the education and upskilling guru, and Bob is the new product development wizard.
Can I ask you something? And I feel like it's just a moment in time right now. And I've been thinking a lot about this. There's been a lot of writing about it, about the diploma divide and how that maybe explains the election outcome. And I kind of feel like it all ties in, because we're going to talk a little bit later, actually after you, about people doing apprenticeships, which is not something that's very popular in the U.S. anymore, but it is overseas. But I do think about education, and I do feel like employers still want academic pedigree. They look for that. And yet we have a lot of Americans that don't necessarily have college degrees. And maybe that explains to some extent the political outcome that we just got in the U.S. presidential election. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts that kind of tie some of this together.
We're trying to help people match with organizations and with roles. That's what this book is designed to do. And in that sense, both sides, the supply side and the demand side, as we were talking about before, get stuck in this what I will be, or what someone has on their resume, rather than what someone will do and how suited they are to the experiences. So when most people think about changing jobs, they tend to focus on the features they want, things like better hours, less travel, higher pay, a worthy title.
More balance.
And the employer, they all sound great to me. And the employee is thinking about, okay, so what can I put in my resume to fit all of those, to make all those things level up on the job description that says that they want an entry-level employee with 5 years of work experience. It's all a sales job from person to person on the basis of the features and the attributes rather than the experiences and what will actually be done. And so part of what we're trying to do is make this a conversation instead about the forces. What are the things that are pushing someone away? We have 14 push forces that we found over these 1,000+ individuals we've interviewed. And what are the pull forces? What are the opportunities they see that pull them towards something? And when those things align, they create enough of a pull and a push aligned to overcome the habit of the present and the anxiety of a new solution to keep people in place. And it's not about all of those attributes. Those are nice things to have, but it's actually about the progress towards those pushes and through those pulls that someone is going to actually make. And so in that sense, it does align with the idea of diplomas and how we think about their role, because some things require it and some things don't, but we're not really talking about that because we're just thinking about the attributes rather than the experiences and the do's.
There's some incredible names that have blurbed the book. Reed Hastings, the co-founder and executive chairman of Netflix, writes that job moves is packed with stuff I wish I'd understood 40 years ago. Follow these 9 steps. Full disclosure, he's also on the board of Bloomberg, I just learned. But it kind of raises a point, like, this is a guy we're talking about who's, co-founded a company that revolutionized media. He's worth $7 billion, according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. Yet he says he can learn from this book. Who's it for?
And we've had some very generous early readers, so I'm grateful to read, and many of the others that are blurbed and have mentioned the book. The book is for primarily people who have had at least one job. It doesn't mean you can't benefit from it if you haven't, but if you've had one job, then you have a sense of what is pushing you away from that and what might be pulling you towards something else. In that sense, then, it's also about people who are on some kind of quest, somebody who wants to make progress. So one of the things we did with these 16 pulls and 14 pushes, we then looked for patterns, and we found 4 patterns. So people are typically on one of 4 quests. They might be trying to get out. Those are people who are trying to reset what their job is expecting of them and how it manages them in that daily life. It might be about people trying to just take the next step. They actually like both parts of it, and they just feel like they're ready for something else. They're trying to get ahead. And the world is sort of designed for those people.
Yeah.
That's what we call progression rather than progress.
Hey,
On the off... Oh,
No. Please finish your thought. Forgive me.
I was going to say, on the off diagonals, though, some people are just trying to regain control over how they're managed, but they like what they're doing. Some people are trying to regain alignment around what they're being asked, what capabilities they're being asked to use, but they love the environment around them. Each one of those quests has a different set of advice that's good for a person. And so when I hear someone like Reed, who I think has probably seen it all, say that, it probably means that he's imagining that if he'd known sooner the way in which to use that common language, he could have more quickly come to the conclusion that he was on this particular quest, and therefore this kind of step was best for him at that stage in his career.
One thing I want to ask you, there's a story that's up on the Bloomberg today about recent college graduates are feeling a cooling U.S. labor market. The gap between the unemployment rate for recent grads and the overall rate for Americans with a college degree widened to 2.8 percentage points in September. This is data from the New York Fed. It's the largest on record going back to 1990, aside from a few months early on in the pandemic. And I guess what I want to ask you, these 9 steps that you talk about, is it only, do you have the ability to follow it in a strong job market? In other words, I guess, it's easy to kind of put your priorities and think about things when there's lots of choices. But when things are a little bit more difficult, is it tough to do that?
When the three of us got together to write a book, it's an excellent question. Write a book about careers. We promised ourselves we wouldn't write a book about the dream job. We would write a book about trade-offs. Because ultimately, that's what a good career looks like. It's a bunch of trade-offs that you make with priorities attached to one or the other piece of that. That's why different quests are different people at different times, and most of us will filter through them over time.
Yeah.
So
just got about 20 seconds, so I want to let you just wrap it up. Yeah.
So really, honestly, it's about being able to tell your story for your particular moment, and then you're not competing with 1,000 people for the job. You're competing with 3. And that's actually better in a tight labor market. So the more work you do, the better off you'll be, even in the kind of labor market it looks like we're heading into.
Well, fun to check in with you. Ethan, thank you so much. Congratulations on the book. Ethan Bernstein, professor of business administration at Harvard Business School. The book is called Job Moves, 9 Steps for Making Progress in Your Career. All right, you are listening and watching Bloomberg. We're talking apprenticeships. That's next. So in prepping for this next segment, came across a Bloomberg opinion column. It was late last year. It was asking the question, can apprenticeships restore the American dream? And the column went into how apprenticeships in America were nowhere compared to every other developed country. Their stats around 1 year ago, noting that the U.S. had 500,000 apprentices. That's 0.3% of the workforce, 70% of them, Tim, in construction trades.
Okay, that contrasts with the apprenticeship giants of Central Europe. They've got 10 to 15 times more apprenticeships per capita than we do. Even the UK, Australia, and Canada, they're 8 times bigger than we are.
We know that, right? We've had guests on talk about what's going on, certainly in Europe in particular. One generation ago, though, they looked a lot like the United States with relatively small apprenticeship sectors, almost all in construction. Today, it's very common for workers in those countries to launch a career in tech or healthcare or even financial services, all happening through an apprenticeship.
We've got with us somebody who knows quite a bit about this. Bertina Ceccarelli is CEO of the nonprofit NPower. It works to move people from poverty to the middle class through tech skills, training, and job placement programs. We've caught up with her in the past. Pleased to have her back with us this afternoon. Bertina, how are you?
I'm terrific. It's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Since we last spoke to you, I've actually noticed, and maybe it's just I've been looking out for it, but I've noticed more and more people talking about these so-called trades.
Yeah.
And part of it, I think, is because a lot of it has to do with there's a real lack of plumbers, electricians in this country, and it's driven up prices for these home services. They're also just great careers to be in. Are now we thinking differently finally in the U.S. about apprenticeships? Again, this is not the exact type of apprenticeships you focus on, but are we thinking about it differently as a society?
Absolutely, without question. And in fact, we are seeing an uptick in apprenticeships in the traditional trades. But there's also been a great rise in the interest of apprenticeships for non-traditional pathways like technology, which has never been deeply invested in apprenticeships until now, right? We find that right now today, that's about 60,000 manufacturing apprenticeships. There's only about 10% of that, a little over 6,000 today that is in tech. But tech happens to be the fastest growing sector for apprenticeships, growing at 2.5 times annually per year. So, I think that we've got great promise in some of these non-traditional pathways to bring people into the IT sector.
Help me out. How does it work? Because I do feel like somebody says, well, I'm in an apprenticeship. They're like, oh, sorry. You know what I mean? Like there is certainly a stigma, I think, in the United States. And we've just been talking about college degrees versus not and elections and all of that and kind of trying to understand where we are as a society, not just certain pockets, but everybody. And not everybody has a college degree. So tell us about these apprenticeships, what they're like, what kind of jobs, what do people ultimately get paid? What is it?
Yeah, so if you think about it, most Americans don't have a four-year degree. And I think that's why traditionally the construction trades and apprenticeships in those fields have been so popular and a path to the middle class. Arguably, apprenticeships in tech are the same thing. And by the way, many of these jobs don't require a college degree. What they do require are skills, certifications, credentials, and this is how it works. It's organizations like NPower that provides that, if you will, pre-apprenticeship training that skills up populations that are often overlooked in certain segments of our labor economy, like tech. And what I mean overlooked, it's individuals who might be veterans, young adults from underserved communities, people without college degrees, but who are motivated and have all the aptitude and the appetite to do well in tech, but they need the opportunity to get those skills. So that's where organizations like NPower and community colleges can play a really important role. We make it easy for then employer partners to become apprenticeship sponsors. So if you've got a skilled pipeline of talent ready to go that has those industries recognized certifications, the next step is for an employer partner to say, let's structure a 6-month learn to earn type of program where an individual gets those on-the-job skills that make them fantastic long-term employees of that company and often, frankly, outperform those who might have college degrees.
Bertina, I could imagine somebody listening right now saying, wait a second, this sounds a lot like an internship, but by a different name. What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's actually very different. First of all, apprenticeships, whether they are registered by the Department of Labor or whether they're company sponsored, typically have a commitment to hire that individual full-time once the apprenticeship period has ended, right? Typically, apprenticeships are for a much longer duration. Oftentimes, internships are a 3-month between college semesters. Apprenticeships tend to be the full-time 6 to 8 months, sometimes up to a year. So there's a real commitment and an investment that a company is making to say, now that I have this individual who's skilled up, I want to convert that person to full-time. And by the way, in the tech sector, about 90% of apprenticeships convert to full-time.
All right. So talk about those full-time jobs. What are they? What are they paid? I'm curious about kind of the payoff, literally.
Yeah, no, it's good, right? We're talking healthy numbers. So these are jobs that, again, we're talking individuals without college degrees who which often start about 60,000 or so. And they're jobs in IT infrastructures where we're seeing the greatest demand. So, we're talking, for example, hardware installation, software support, hardware maintenance, computer systems and networking, upgrades. Big emphasis in cybersecurity, in cloud computing, and project management, right? These are just really core skills that any company needs, whether it's a really large multinational global company like a Citi or an Accenture, a mid-sized company like a healthcare services firm, or a small business, right? We've got a charter school network in the Bronx that is hiring IT apprentices right and left.
Hey, we only have a minute left, but I'm a little puzzled as to why the U.S. kind of got behind with this. Why is that? Very briefly.
I would say that it's just not necessarily in the DNA of understanding what it takes to earn a great income. And it's not to say that college isn't terrific. I'm the first advocate. And oftentimes, once you get financially stable, you can go on and get that college degree. But I think we've really had a preference towards that 4-year degree. And I think the reality is there are millions of people who benefit from an apprenticeship program that land them a middle-class, good job that can help build wealth over time.
Very cool.
Yeah, very interesting. I also wonder too if companies at this point are thinking about survivability. How many executives, HR, CEO that talk about partnering high schools even, you know, to make sure that they've got the future workforce. It's really
Jamie
important.
Dimon talks about this a lot, the future workforce.
Rethink. Bertina Ceccarelli, Chief Executive Officer at NPower, joining us once again from Brooklyn, New York. So appreciate it. You're listening and watching Bloomberg.